Hello again, future test managers. Welcome back to our ISTQB Test Management V3 journey. Hope you're doing all great and ready to dive into one of the most essential tasks in the entire testing process, the test planning. Now, I know what you're thinking. Planning doesn't sound all that exciting. But trust me, if you mess this one up, your whole testing effort is going to feel like trying to build an IKEA furniture piece without the manual, if you know what I'm saying. So let's take this one step by step and see what test planning is all about. Let's kick off with a simple question. Why is test planning considered the most essential task in the test process? Honestly, the test planning activity is the only way to define everything. What to be tested, how it's going to be tested, when are we going to test it, and who is going to do all of that. That's pretty much everything, right? Now, it's super important to understand that test planning can take place at different scopes. Let me explain that. So, by default, we all know that the test plan synchronizes with everything at the project level. Okay? I mean, we can make a master test plan for a new CRM system, for example. But you can also plan for a specific test level, like system integration testing. Test planning can easily answer the same four questions. For example, if we want to verify the integration between our app and a payment gateway, test planning can answer the following questions. What? We are testing the proper communication and data validity transfer between our e-commerce app and PayPal. How? We are going to use schema validation to verify data correctness and also database testing to ensure proper transaction history records. When? This system integration testing is to be performed after system testing and should take about 10 days to complete. And lastly, who? We will need a database tester and an API tester. See? The same concept can be applied to any particular test type, say performance testing or usability, or even for a single release or sprint, especially if you are in an agile environment, as flexibility is a must here. Now, speaking of agile, the timing of the test planning can vary depending on your development model. So if we think about waterfall, obviously you're going to be dealing with a more upfront test plan, which is almost established and completed very early. The test plan is very serious, or let's say formal, with a lot of details. On the other hand, agile test planning happens in shorter bursts. It's lightweight and evolves quickly, with a lot of adaptability to changes taking place during the development process. And here's a real-world tip for my agile folks. Even if your planning feels less document-heavy or more informal, the test plan is still crucial. You still need to identify risks and their mitigation procedures, plan tests to be conducted in each sprint, allocate your test resources, and align your test efforts with the sprint goals. So, no slacking off just because you're agile, alright? Of course, we don't have to talk about how important the test plan is and why starting the planning phase early is one of the best things you can do as a test manager. I believe this is just a child's play for us. Very well. Let's now go over the core tasks in the test planning activity. I believe there are 5 of them, and we will walk through each one in just a moment. First up, you, as a test manager, must understand the context and organize everything according to that context. So, before writing a single word in your test plan, you need to understand what you're walking into. So, ask yourself, what's the test policy of the company? This is the high-level direction. Do managers get to determine their team members or not, for example? Also, what's the organizational test strategy? That's the general framework for testing. Does this organization favors manual or automated testing? Maybe both. And of course, what is the test item? Is it a back-end API, a front-end UI, or maybe a mobile application? Then comes the organizing part, where you plan your activities and get buy-in from key people in your organization. For instance, the product owner will have to approve the business goals you have set. The project manager is the one to approve the schedule and the budget, and you'll need the approval of the development team lead regarding the feasibility and your testability requirements. At this stage, you don't have a full-fledged test plan, but rather a draft. And these approvals are just initial ones and to be reapproved when you finalize your test plan later. But anyway, collaboration is huge at this stage. Next, identify and analyze product risks. Now, risks are potential troublemakers. They are uncertain events that could negatively affect the product. You need to think wisely here. More serious risks should be prioritized first, so you'll need to identify the impact and likelihood of each risk, and this will help you prioritize testing efforts like a boss. For instance, if you are testing a banking app, a login security failure would be a critical risk, okay? High impact and high likelihood. But a minor UI misalignment on tablets? Not the end of the world, and it has a low impact and low likelihood, and we can deal with this risk later if we don't have the time or resources at the moment. Great. Let's shift gears to the third activity in the planning process. Identify risk treatment approaches. Now that you know what the risks you are encountering are, the next logical question is, how are we going to deal with them? If we stick to our login security risk example from earlier, we can say that there are three main approaches we can use to try to deal with such a risk. 1. Preventive. Avoid the risk altogether, like using secure coding practices. 2. Corrective. Here we fix the issue if it pops up, like patching the vulnerabilities very quickly. 3. Mitigating. Generally reducing the impact of the risk, like adding extra penetration testing. So, as a test manager, you're not just pointing out risks, you're also part of the solution. Now for the fourth activity, define the test approach and estimate and allocate resources. Alright, so when you're defining your testing plan, you're basically thinking about how a feature is going to be tested. To figure that out, you need to define the test approach and allocate your resources for this specific purpose. Here, you define how you'll be testing the software. However, the approach can vary based on several things. For example, your organization's test strategy and regulatory requirements like the ISO or the GDPR, budget and time constraints, and the risks you just identified from earlier. I believe these need no further explanation. The next step is to estimate the needed resources like people, tools, environments, and test data. For example, if you're planning for performance testing, you might need JMeter, that's the tool, a near production environment, and a performance testing expert available for 3 weeks. Sounds simple, maybe not, but with good planning, it becomes manageable. And finally, establish the test plan. This is where all the pieces come together. Here, you write up the official and finalized test plan document. What goes in there? Well, I believe we have mentioned all of the test plan elements, from the scope to objectives to approach, moving to schedule, resources, risks, and mitigation methods, and don't forget the entry and exit criteria. Here's the important part. This plan has to be approved by all stakeholders. But let's ask this imaginary question. What if the dev manager wants fewer tests, but the product owner wants more? Now, you must resolve everything at this point. No surprises later. All right, everyone. I believe this signals the end of this lecture. Great job. As always, if you have any questions or you need more examples, the Q&A section is open. I'm just a message away. Thanks for sticking around. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.